as a practical matter, it can't be wound down within the term of a CP program. So what we are going to propose is either you demonstrate that your asset-backed commercial paper, the assets backing can be wound down, or you have a 2-year arrangement in place, such as a sound line of credit from someone to cover a market shutdown. A caveat on that is if you're saying, oh, I'm going to wind down, it can't be on assets that look like more or less conventional banking relationship assets, because you're just shifting the credit crunch from the ADI to the customer, and in a systemic sense, that's not doing us any good. On pre-approvals, for the past 5 years, we've operated without pre-approvals. Despite various issues with that, that's better than us approving every deal in advance, so we're proposing to continue that. In terms of APRA response to noncompliance, for us, one of the attractions of this is we're going to create a regime where it's very clear from the point of view of the ADI and its board whether they're compliant or not. If you engage in a simple, straightforward structure, it will clearly comply and it won't be a problem. And I would go so far to say to you, if you are asking yourself the question, does this comply? The presumption is no. It should be obvious that it complies. What happens if you want to pursue a somewhat aggressive structure that is not so sure about complying? Well, you're taking a risk. A risk in this context is APRA could disallow capital reduction, or increasingly APRA will look at limiting or ending that ADI's ability to issue securitization. So what we're saying is, guys, don't jerk us around. We're trying to create a framework in which it's very obvious how you can do funding only. It's very obvious how you can do capital relief. So do it the obvious way. Moving on to another point, under the covered bond legislation, ADIs face an 8% statutory limit on the degree to which they can pledge assets. Now, there are cognate arguments why APRA should put a similar but larger limit on the degree to which ADIs could pledge assets for securitization. After some thought on this internally, we've instead decided to rely, for the time being at least, on our more general principle that an ADI must have prudently diversified funding sources. So we are not proposing to go out with an explicit encumbered asset limit. You should note, however, that we will review that from time to time, and if an ADI or the industry appears to us becoming too reliant on securitization, well, we have a number of tools in place to deal with that. Finally, the current APS 120 allows for capital relief for some derivatives transactions, such as synthetic securitization. This is a little used provision, and it makes some sense when looked at from the point of view of an individual institution. But on a systemic basis, it's essentially someone creates a contract that transfers risk from an informed party to a less informed party, and it's not clear the less informed party has any more ability to absorb the loss than the originator does. So what we're going to propose to do is remove this provision for ADIs holding B-class instruments and for synthetic securitizations. So what are our aspirations? Well, our aspiration for securitization under the proposed prudential arrangements is that Australia will end up with a large and active funding-only market. This will materially assist Australia's banking sector to correct its current imbalance between long-term retail domestic assets and a funding side overly reliant upon the kindness of strangers. By integrating the liquidity side of APS 120 with APRA's prudential liquidity requirements, we will better insulate Australia from future global or domestic funding market failures. We are hopeful that the new arrangements also allow a substantial market and capital relief securitizations under arrangements that much more explicitly transfer credit risk from the originator to other investors. It remains to be seen how this market will develop. In any event, we consider that these arrangements will maintain robust incentives for originators to maintain reasonable lending quality. We seek to avoid any buildup of toxic structured credit assets on the Australian banking system's balance sheet. Australia largely dodged this bullet during the GFC and we need to ensure that the lessons learned are captured in Australia's prudential framework. Finally, as with international perceptions, 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 perceptions,